Today I'm speaking with Holly Copeland. She is a vibrational sound healing master, Reiki master, and she's also does coaching sessions to help people tap into their own energy and to live their best life. Now, today we're going to be talking about awareness. What does that mean? How do you live from awareness? How does that even change your life? So I hope you enjoy our conversation today. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast for this week. This week, we have the wonderful Holly Copeland here with us. Hi, Holly. How are you doing?
Hi, Natalie. I'm just fine. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Now, Holly, we're going to have a really interesting conversation today. Holly is a conservation scientist, recovering conservation scientist, could we say?
Yes.
Turned energy healer, Reiki master, and all of the amazing healing arts and modalities that she's taken on at this time of her life to really help us understand kind of how the universe works, how our energy works, and what it means to be living a life from a place of awareness. So that's the juicy conversation we're going to be having today. So, Holly, why don't we start with your story? Because, I know that there's a lot of people who are listening to the podcast who are looking at maybe changing, something in their life, whether it's a career or whatever that is. But you've actually lived through it to tell the tale.
I have. And I love speaking about that and inspiring people to move towards their greater truth. And so I love speaking about how I felt like I totally upended my life and realigned it towards my truth. And to speak from the other side and describe the freedom and the joy that I feel there and how I made that shift is one of the stories I love sharing. So,
Yeah.
So I was working for the Nature Conservancy as a conservation scientist. That was the career I was trained in. I was trained as a geographer and scientist, ecologist. I wrote like over 20 papers and published them in scientific journals. So I was like doing the thing, really steeped in ecology. And it was a wonderful career. And I was working with amazing people. And by all rights, it was a dream job. I was also living in a small Western town, raising my kids, living out my dream of raising my kids in a small town with my now ex-husband, but, my partner at the time. And we were doing that very joyfully, I would say, And I came to this point where I had checked all those boxes, kind of having the dream job, having the kids and the husband and all of that. And yet I still wasn't happy. I'd done all the things. And I found myself with this, my existential, I guess, discontent, and went on the search for what that was, because I couldn't make my life any more perfect on the outside. I would have been crazy. And I literally was thinking that, like, I am crazy to not be happy. What is wrong? That kind of.
Yeah.
And also really feeling a lot of despair and hopelessness over the state of the planet. So, the kind of person who follows the news and felt like I was quite informed. And there was a sense of like, oh my God, everywhere I turn is an, oh my God, awful thing.
Right.
You relate to that?
Oh, yeah. That's
Right?
why I haven't watched the news for 30 years.
Yeah.
Like I can't. I mean, it makes me feel helpless because there's nothing I can do about it, kind of thing.
Exactly. So. Exactly. And I ultimately stopped watching the news too, but it had that feeling of like, you can't turn anywhere and not sort of feel like something awful is happening. And it actually culminated. I remember this moment. I had a trail behind my house that I would run on every day. And this moment of like every single second, some, oh my God, awful thing is obviously happening all over the world, whether you're talking about abuse of animals, children, whatever, right? Anything we would consider horrible. And so how do you come to live do I have the right to even be happy knowing that all of these awful things are happening? And where is the happiness in the midst? Because even if I'm not aware of it, it's still an awful thing is happening. So I was really having this kind of existential crisis around how do we deal with the horrors in the world and still be happy? And do I even have that right? You know?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, my narrator voice was kind of unable to shut off. And then I got mold poisoning. So I got a health crisis.
Right.
And that mold, I didn't know what it was. And it took me a long time to even figure out, with the help of some amazing functional medicine doctors and people who pointed me even that it was mold, and then finding the mold. And that was like its whole year-long journey as well. And the way that I tell it is, as I started to do the work, I basically got to this point with the mental kind of evil good and the mental thing of like, I've got to fix this thing inside my head and figure it out. And I literally wrote my Rewire My Brain project at the top of my journal in 2019. Like, I'm going to figure this out. And I'd been a spiritual seeker my whole life, so don't like think that I was like the first time. I'd been listening to Eckhart Tolle and Oprah, and I'd been like listening to the things, and so I had this deep spiritual knowing, but still this existential stress, I couldn't shake it, even from all that I knew.
Right.
And so I started to go inwards and meditate, because it felt like that was the last thing that I hadn't really tried. Um, and I also started to read a lot about brainwaves and brainwave science. And I read this book by this Dr. Les Fermi called The Open Focus Brain. And I learned about alpha brainwaves and theta brainwaves and how to train my brain to calm down. And so I started practicing that. And I got this Muse headband, this headband that helps you like learn to get into an alpha state. And then I took a meditation class with some teachers on subtle energy meditation. And we started doing these deep meditations. And they started showing me, like, I started going into these places in meditation that I'd never been, and really feeling and sensing what's called emptiness in the Buddhist terminology. So really starting and asking the question, this who am I question of who am I really? And discovering the miracle of awareness, and started just studying all these different teachers. And that fundamentally started to pull me into, a totally different state, what I call like out of ordinary mind into kind of awakened, what I would describe as awakened mind.
Right.
And it fundamentally changed everything about how I are in the world. And I found in that sense, I stopped the seeking. I found the happiness I was searching for, and became my life's mission to help others with that too.
Yeah. I love that story. And I know there's a lot of our listeners who can relate to a version of that for themselves. Because I too, I started, I was handed my first set of cassettes when I was 21, but that was more, like Brian Tracy and Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins. And then I started reading in my 30s, I started reading things like Conversations with God and Celestine Prophecy and The Way of the Peace Warrior. And then, and I think sometimes, and I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you may find this is, for you as well. Sometimes there'll be some, like an Eckhart Tolle or some kind of information comes through, and there's something in you that lights up. It's like, ooh, I need to know more. I need more of this. Like I'm really attracted towards this. So it can take you down that avenue. And it's amazing how something as simple as meditation can help us to discover what we already have inside of us, and our connection to the unified field, or our connection to the divine, and how when we can cross-section those two things through something like meditation, it can really change the way that we understand and see everything. Right?
Yeah.
So I know we were talking about, having an aware mind, or we're talking about awareness. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
What's your definition of that?
Yeah. And thank you for saying, all of what you just said, because I think you're absolutely right. It's incredible, right? It doesn't seem possible that our perception could fundamentally, the mind can't grasp that your perception, how you perceive, is actually what's creating the suffering that you're in.
Right.
That some type of different pointing could actually fundamentally change your experience of being human. But that is exactly my experience, is that the discovery of this that was pointed to me and the practice of this does fundamentally change my experience of being human.
Right.
And one other thing, and I will answer your question about awareness. I think it's so true. Like when something can hit you, like I remember the exact moment I was listening to Eckhart Tolle interviewed by Oprah in her Soul series, and I was staining the house and I had it playing in the background. And he told his story about him not being his thoughts. And I literally just was like, my head did a head like snap, like, what? What do you mean? And how many times had I read that in a book, which I had, but the way that he described it in that moment of his recognition absolutely snapped something in me. It took a long time to actually land in my own experience what he was saying, but it can happen like that. Like it's the snap of whoa that you want to look for. Okay, so to your question about awareness.
So before you answer that, because I had one of those moments as well, and this was the week that my husband and I separated, and I was listening to The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
Love him. I love him.
Yeah. And of course, the whole week it's like my mind is just, where am I going to live? What am I going to do? Who am I? Who am I without him? It's always been us. So you have all those thoughts going through. So it probably wasn't until like Thursday that I started to hear what was said, because I was listening to the book. And my thing was, this is just a moment in time. It's just a moment. And we get to choose how we see this moment, how we perceive it, how we are going to allow it to affect us moving forward. And it's one of millions of moments that you can have in your life. I'm like, yeah. But here's the thing about that. And the reason I had that moment, I think the reason you had that moment is because we were at that time or at that place on our timeline where that message was pertinent to what we needed to hear. Now, we could have heard it 50 times before, but because our life wasn't in a situation where we needed to know that just yet, right. It was until we were in that moment or in that situation that you go, oh, okay, I see what's going on now, and it lands in a different way.
Completely. I so agree. Like you can't manufacture when something is going to hit you. That's awareness is seeking itself, right? It's your awakening is seeking you. So therefore, it will point to you when you are ready, it will show itself. And in that, I find a kind of hopefulness, because we can relax a little bit. We can be like, I don't have to try so hard. I can just, it's not that there's a level of efforting that you're still making, but you can relax knowing the universe has your back. It's got you, it's seeking you. And the moment when you're ready to hear it, you will hear it. It will, you'll know, Oh, and I'm getting all kinds of chills. Yeah. And that, for a person who's like, believe me, I am like the straight A student, try hard person. Like that's like, I love efforting, and this journey out of efforting and trusting is actually my path to like deeply trust and have deep faith that we don't have to try so hard.
Yeah. And I think awareness for me is like, I remember having a conversation with my mum, and she's like, I don't understand, she's Catholic. I don't understand, this spiritual thing you're talking about. I went, all right, okay. So Mum, tell me what religion does for you. And she goes, well, it helps me to be a moral person, to do the right thing. And it helps me to explain when bad things happen. And I go, that's exactly what my belief and my awareness does for me as well. Mm-hmm. It helps me to understand that when bad things are happening, atrocious things are happening, that it's part of a greater design or a greater play. And there's a reason for everything. And even though you can go down to the minuscule, the moment that's happening, or if you come out, and I call about the 10,000 foot view, If you're looking from here and you can see how all the pieces are kind of fitting together, then you go, I understand why that's happening. And, and through my awareness, I get to choose how I process this information, how I use this information, how I leverage this information in a way that's going to help or to change the way that I see things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You relax the victim in the story. I think what I hear you say.
Yeah. And I remember I've had a few through meditation, had moments where I see life as a tapestry, but it's a ball that's continuously moving. Yeah. But every string or every thread in that tapestry is a person's timeline. And there's reason and purpose as to why things overcross and meet and so forth.
Yeah. So to answer your question more directly in terms of what is awareness to me, I mean, awareness to me now as I experience it is everything that's happening, because ultimately my experience is that we're in a universal hologram. We're unlimited, infinite beings. And, this, and it's the consistent, it's the ground, as the Tibetans say, it's our ground of being. And, just for anybody who's listening right now, because I love taking it out of the conceptual and to the lived experience, if you just gaze right now at an object in the room as you're listening to this, and you just kind of let your eyes relax, and you see whatever is in your vision. Mine's a, wall with a desk and some things. And then you close your eyes and you feel what's here. And then you open your eyes again. You feel what's here. Awareness is the unchanging element of your experience. It's that simple. It's the one thing that is unchanging in all the experience, right? There's a presence or a beingness here that when I close my eyes and open them, it's very clear that this beingness is here. It's that. And that is so, has been said in so many different scriptures, and right, it's so simple, it's so easy to overlook. And then there's sort of like, well, what's so great about that? How is that truly transformative? And in my experience, what you can experience for yourself, actually, even right now, that this presence, this beingness, that whether you open or close your eyes is still here, also is the same beingness that's here. You allow a thought to arise, could be a bad thought, a good thought, and then the thought leaves, right? So no thought you've ever had has ever stayed. No feeling you've ever had has ever stayed. There's this beingness that transcends and is unstainable, as I've heard it described. And that is my experience, which means that the presence in the being we are is fundamentally perfect as we are. It doesn't need any fixing. Who you are you can't be better than perfect. And so it shifts for me this, ultimately we do a little bit of, as Rupert Spira describes it, we separate out that there's a presence and a beingness, and then there's thoughts and feelings and the elements of our experience, sight and sound that arises and comes and goes. And we kind of start to build this understanding, this felt experience, that this beingness isn't any of those things. Those things are things we're aware of, but we aren't fundamentally them. Right. And then we do come into a merging together where the ultimate understanding is we're actually all of it, which is a little bit harder to kind of feel sense at first. But nonetheless, I think that's the ultimate truth, is we're actually everything that we're experiencing. And what I want to also kind of maybe end this little part with is that for me, the fundamental truth here, because there's an awareness that is already and always whole, that isn't lacking or missing anything, we can start to feel that as our experience in reality, that you, awareness, and everybody listening, you are fundamentally whole. You don't need anything to be any different to be okay. And that understanding that I don't need anything different to be okay, to be fundamentally whole, means that the okayness that I was seeking is what I am. It's already here. And each of us is like, it's okay. And when I recognized that, when I really, like, that landed for me in that deep, oh my God way of, it's okay. Like, I'm actually okay. And it's all going to be okay. Like, there was such, I mean, well, actually, the first moment I really felt this when a guide I was working with said those words, and it was like there were just floods of tears, because I'd been holding this, all of my grief for the world and my sense of the trauma of the world, like the conversation I started with, where I was like, how can I be okay when all these awful things are happening to everybody in the planet, you know? And that, like, feeling of it's actually okay and it's going to be okay, not as somebody needs to tell me that, but as actually my experience. Then what I found is that my knowing of wholeness, like putting your own oxygen mask on first in the airplane, has now enabled me to come to anything, to the world, from a place of wholeness, not a place of lack. And that's incredibly empowering, because now we can be of service to the world. What I like, one analogy I use is, it's like the world is on fire. Like, imagine, right? The house is on fire, right? Like, we can't really argue. The house appears to be on fire. And what each of us, I think, is growing into is becoming the firefighter in the story, right? And the firefighters that are our heroes are not the ones that come to this fire and go, oh my God, there's a house on fire, which is how I spent most of my life, right? They come and they, like, show up and they're like, I'm here, I'm ready to help. And I tell that story because the shift that happened for me when I fundamentally recognized that I was okay was I could show up in the world as the firefighter, like, I'm here, I'm ready to help. And now I have infinite capacity to help the world so in need. Now I'm not suffering, I'm whole. And all of that came from my understanding of awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the way that I like to describe it is that I am the observer of my thoughts. I am the observer of the situations that happen outside of me. I'm the observer of my actions. And I think to be able to get to that point, I know that as we're growing up, and in our meat suit and the human part of our experience, we have certain environments, things that happen when we're kids. And one of my coping mechanisms was to, kind of shut down emotionally, like, and to detach myself emotionally, which is a gift when you're looking at awareness and you can step out of a situation or without any emotional attachment and go, okay, I can see the components here. I can have empathy for this person. I understand what's going on. Like, I could do that. It's also a double-edged sword, because, if you're shutting down emotions, you're shutting down all your emotions, and that's probably not good if you're in a relationship. But, but also having that awareness of the human experience that we're having, so that when certain situations show up, certain catalyzing relationships, jobs, people, situations, that we can choose how we're responding in that moment, rather than just reacting, and which is normally from a place of wounding. And then life just gets hard, and then we keep attracting the same situations over and over again and going, well, what's going on here? Then you realize you're the common denominator and go, oh, damn it, maybe it's me. But that's also, practically how I see awareness, or the benefit of how I see awareness showing up in my life as well, because it helps me to have more empathy and to kind of stand outside of the situation and be a little more, empathetic when it comes to, different points of view, different ways that people show up in the world, and especially on subjects that are very polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
I can sit and understand both sides of the coin.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, I find that too, and especially in polarizing conversations, what I find is that it's actually seeing that awareness is the common denominator for all of us. So because, you and every single person listening is an infinite divine being, right? In a sense, I see you as Buddha, I see you as Christ, every single person I meet, because I am no different than you. Awareness is the common element, right? I have 100% confidence that my awareness is the same as your awareness. Would be the same awareness if Trump was sitting here, would be the same awareness as, the Dalai Lama was sitting here, would be the same awareness as, any other, person, either side of whatever, wherever you put them in the world, that awareness is the common element. And so that means that ultimately, when you see beyond the conversation that's happening at the surface level, the polarity, the division, and you see into the humanness, the divinity, the awareness of each person, for me, it brings enormous compassion and understanding to see them that way.
And so my next question is, how do you cultivate or maintain this awareness?
Yeah.
What are your daily practices to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the Tibetan, in the Dzogchen practices, there's first, there's the view, which is seeing the view, which is what we just did. That you see and you have this kind of felt, but actually not just conceptual knowing of awareness, but you have this sense of your awareness. And then it's practicing. It's actually like walking the path where everything that's in our experience is here to awaken us. And so, I practice it like lots of little moments throughout the day, starting with meditation in the morning and prayer and meditation in the evening, and little, as Locke Kelly says, little glimpses all day long. And I did that for a long time until, what I found is the more I practice that, the more it starts to stabilize, the more it becomes my lived experience of living, as awareness, basically, and not as the character in the play. It's like you're kind of simultaneously in the play, in the world, but not of it, in the play, but also aware of the character that you're playing. And so it isn't, and it becomes something that, at first there's some efforting to kind of do those glimpses, and then it starts to stick more and more and more, where that becomes your lived place where you're operating from. And it is like that. It's like a shift in awareness. And I also find that, like, where I'm aware from has shifted. So most, I think most people, and I certainly was one of these people, where it feels like I'm operating from behind the eyes, a kind of space in the center of the head. And more, and this is my practice too, is operating from the heart space, like really looking at the world through the eyes of the heart. Because you can even do this now, like listeners that are listening, just notice what your experience is of looking at an object in your room from the normal way, behind your eyes, and then shift your awareness so that you drop it down into your heart, and then look at that same object through the eyes of your heart and see what you notice. What I notice, I actually, before I say that, what do you notice, Natalie, when you do that?
Well, when I do that, I notice that if someone, like, I'm just thinking of past experiences, if I'm in a heated conversation, or if I'm, in an angsty conversation, it takes me out of that conversation and just being able to see that other person from a place of love. Because even though someone may be catalyzing for us in that moment, 99.9% of the time, it's not intentional. They're coming from their understanding, their experience. And they're not doing it to upset you, but they're trying to, show you their side of things. So when you are from a place of the heart, you can't do anything but love that other person.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, that's what I find too. I find an incredible softening, like that
Mm,
softening of position. So, um, yeah, and there's lots of little ways that you can, just kind of test yourself. Am I aware in this moment? It can be very, very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be pausing when you're in a conversation with somebody and just notice, like, where am I aware from, and drop into your heart. Um, Practice not having a view, like just being with the person as they're speaking and feeling the conversation through your felt sense rather than through the analytical mind. You
mm.
know, it's those kinds of practices that, I kind of did obsessively all day long for a while, until it started to stick more and more. And and I never stopped practicing either, right? It's a
Mm.
deepening, it's an evolving, it's an evolution in my experience, that we're all on our own unfolding journey of experiencing, through and as awareness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Holly, I knew that this was going to be a delightful conversation today, which it has been. Now, and I know that you do a lot of like energy healing. You work with people in like in a coaching situation as well. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and how people can find you.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Mm,
So they can find me at heartmindalchemy.com. That's my website. And what I do is I blended the work I do. So we've talked a lot about awareness today, and that's kind of the awakening part. And then I do have two other pillars in my work: heal and breathe. And I combine energetic healing with tuning forks, with biofield tuning work. You touched a little bit earlier in our conversation about, triggers, and when we get triggered by something, which is a moment to step into awareness and kind of, am I aware of this? But
mm,
also, I have found that working at the energetic level to clear those triggers, like we freeze, you know, the way I describe it is like when we were 5 years old, if we got bit by a dog, let's say, and we're sort of still afraid of dogs, that fear of dogs is held in our energy field as a dissonance, as a literal kind of energetic angle.
mm.
And energy healing is one tool. Energy healing with tuning forks is one tool that can help untangle that knot so that you no longer are afraid of dogs. Awareness can, definitely, I think you can do this with the mind and sit with awareness too. So, but I think tuning forks are a rapid way to help the body clear those patterns.
Right.
And then I do breath work, that I learned from teacher Julia Mick, the Alignment Institute. And I combine those three modalities to help people clear their sort of old patterns and beliefs so they can be free and live aligned and the life they were meant to live.
Okay.
Yeah. And I absolutely love doing the work.
Awesome. We'll make sure that that link is in the bio notes as well.
Mm.
Um, so, darling, thank you so much for your time today and this great conversation. And I'm so happy that we got to share it with our audience. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.